Friends of YouTube, welcome back. So it is almost the end of the month, so you know what that means. It's time for another wrap up. Okay guys, so let's get right into it. I had a really good reading month this month in more ways than one. So number one, I read 8 books, which I feel like is a little bit more than I've read recently. And then on top of that, I had not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 5-star books out of the 8 books that I read. And I feel like that is more 5-star books than I've ever had in a month than in the time that I have been like recording books that I've read. And yeah, I was really happy with the books I read this month. I feel like I read a lot of really amazing books that are just really great. So yeah, let's get into them. Unfortunately, we're not starting with one of those 5 stars. And this is The Ride of a Lifetime, which is by Robert Iger. And it's basically the story of, it's a business memoir that is a book about his time at Disney. And I'm gonna be honest, for a guy that ran Disney, the happiest place on earth, this guy is surprisingly not that likable. And his book was not that likable. You guys, I don't know. So I read this. So I am reading Bill Gates's 5 favorite books of the season, and I'm going to make a video about it. I was planning on doing it this month, but it's going to be delayed until next month at this point. But this was one of his recommended books, and I can see why Bill Gates would like this book, because obviously Bill Gates himself has been a very successful CEO, and I could see why he would like to read about other CEOs and their journey. Personally, I usually like business books like this as well. I find this book is like a pretty easy book to read. I normally have pretty good experiences with them, but this book, I didn't like it. And I don't even want to go into all the details of why I didn't like it, but I would say subscribe and then you can see that video and I will go into a lot more detail of my thoughts about this book. And so I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. So yeah, moving on. Now we're getting into the 5-star territory. So the next book I read was How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram x Kendi. This book I thought was so good. Here's why. It's basically a memoir of the author's life and experiences, but then it also is a very structured introduction to racism. So it talks about just like all the different types of racism that exists in the world today, really focused on the United States, but it talks about like colorism. It talks about space racism, how we have like racism against certain spaces that are predominantly certain races. It talks about racism when it comes to how people speak. And I thought where this book really did well is it had a good balance between personal stories of his life, but it also had a lot of really great information and was very informative about racism. And I thought it was structured in a really great way, where it was like every chapter was like a different type of racism. And so I think if you're someone who is new to learning about this and you just want a really good like one-stop shop introduction to racism and anti-racism, I would definitely recommend this book for sure. Okay, moving on. I read I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austen Channing Brown. This was one of Reese's book club picks. This book, I think, I also gave this book 5 stars because there was really nothing not to like about it, so I had to give it 5 stars. Here's the thing about this book though. I think, first of all, it's quite a short book and it really is more of a personal experience. It talks about how this woman, Austen Channing Brown, she has like a white sounding name and she, for the most part, has lived in predominantly white schools. She's worked in predominantly white workplaces, and it's kind of her experience navigating that. I thought this book was interesting. I thought it was just a really insightful view into her world, into how she has lived her life in a predominantly white world. And I thought, for me, this was interesting because obviously, or maybe not obviously, but for me, I have also lived in a predominantly white world. And a lot of times, like in my workplace, in school, there's only been like 1 or 2 Black people. And I think this book was really eye-opening for me because it gave me more of an insight into some of the things that those individuals may have gone through or some of the experience that they may have had or something similar. I think if you're someone who's looking to educate yourself more about anti-racism and racism, I don't think this book is necessarily the best place to start, because it really is more of like a personal account rather than like overall education about racism in general. But I think this is a great like additional book if you've already read some books that are more like academic kind of stuff. So yeah, another really great book. Okay, now we're moving on to some of the not so good books. So the next book I read was A Good Marriage, which is a Book of the Month Club pick from I think a month or two ago. And I'm gonna be honest, this book was not good. I did not like it. It was really disappointing, I'm not gonna lie. I made a whole separate review where I talk about my feelings on this book and why I didn't like it. So yeah, check that video out and I will go into a whole lot more details on this book. So my next book that I read was another 5-star book. This is just, this month was such a good reading month for me, and this is An American Marriage, and this is a book that I've had on my shelf for a while. I've had my eye on. This has been recommended by, this was on, I know, Bill Gates' reading list a few seasons ago. I think this is like one of maybe Oprah's book club picks, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm making that up. And this is a novel. There's this newlywed couple, and basically the husband ends up being incarcerated for a crime that he did not commit. And it's really just a touching story of their relationship. And it's honestly, it's a hard book to read because it gets really emotional, but I thought it was just really well done. I really connected with their writing style. The story really tugged at the heartstrings, and it was just so good, you guys. For some reason, I thought this book was a mystery, and I think the reason is because the cover looks eerily similar to Miracle Creek. Let me get that book. Okay, so this is An American Marriage, and this is Miracle Creek. For some reason, I was getting these books mixed up because they both have trees on the cover, and so for some reason, I thought American Marriage was supposed to be a mystery. It's not a mystery, it's more of like a contemporary, like literary fiction kind of book, but definitely would recommend this book, and I'm going to be looking into this author's other books because she's written several others that I definitely want to check out. So yeah. The next book I read was The New Jim Crow, which is basically it's a nonfiction book about mass incarceration and how it particularly affects people of color, especially Black people in the United States. And this book, this was not intentional, but I read this book, I listened to the audiobook of The New Jim Crow at the same time that I was reading An American Marriage, and that, I think, kind of amplified the power of both of these books, because this is a fiction book, but reading the nonfiction kind of version of this book that talks about mass incarceration and more of the like statistics and the facts that back it up, it was just crazy to read this book at the same time, and I would highly recommend doing so if you are thinking about it. The New Jim Crow is, I'm not gonna lie, it's definitely more of like an academic book. It's a bit beefy. It goes into a lot of facts and statistics and a lot of history about Jim Crow, about the beginnings of mass incarceration, how it all came to be, and how kind of it affects different races differently in the United States. But I still gave it 5 stars because I thought it was just so good. I was like, at that point, after I gave out like 3 5-stars already this month, I was like, am I being overly generous? But then I was like, I really can't think of anything I don't like about this book, because it was really powerful. It was educational. It had personal stories, but it was still really centered in the facts of everything. And yeah, I mean, what's not to like about that? You know what I mean? So yeah, moving on. The next book I read was another 5-star book. This is my last 5-star book. And this one, it may not end up being 5 stars. It may be 4 stars. I was like between 4 and 5 stars, and I can't quite make up my mind. It's kind of one of those books where I was super hyped up on this book. I went in with extremely high expectations, and I can't really decide if this was like a legit 5-star book or this was a 5-star book where there was like 1 star of hype in there that was bringing it up to 5 stars. But I don't know if you know what I'm talking about yet, but this is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And I actually just filmed a 3-minute thriller review on this book, so check it out if I've already posted it. I don't know if I'm gonna post this before or after I post this video, but this book was a classic mystery thriller ghost story. I would say of all of Riley Sager's books, this is the one that delves most into the horror ghost side of things. A lot of his books have kind of like a nod to the supernatural, a nod to like ghost stories and legends and lore. And I would say this book took it to the next level where it was really more of a like real ghost story, and it was creepy, it was atmospheric, it was twisty, there were a ton of twists and turns, and it was a page turner, and there was really not much to dislike about this book. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. I don't know for sure if it is my favorite of Riley Sager's books. I may have liked Lock Every Door better, but I don't know. I need to give it some more time to really think about it of which one I like better, but yeah, highly recommend this book. And the last one. The last book is quite a short book. That's not the front. I read the book Mortality, which is, this book, I had a lot of mixed feelings about this book, and I had a lot of, I don't know, I didn't know what to think about this book. So it's written by Christopher Hitchens, and it is a memoir about his experience dying of cancer. It was written when he had stage 4 esophageal cancer, and it's his experience kind of going through that, and kind of his thoughts about death and dying and his own experience going through that. And okay, I would be honest, like I had a really hard time not giving this book 5 stars because I'm like, okay, this is a book written by a man that was dying of cancer, struggling with chemotherapy, going through a ton of like really tough stuff. And so I'm like, I feel bad like not giving this book 5 stars, but here's the deal with this book. I feel like if it was written by someone else who is not in the middle of dying of cancer, I probably would have given it 3 stars because I felt like it was a bit meandering. Like it kind of went all over the place, and some of it I felt was a little dense and I don't know, a little bit dry in my opinion. However, because of the circumstances in which this book was written, I ended up bumping it up to 4 stars. And I thought what was really powerful about it is like towards when you get like this book, I think was supposed to be a longer book. It's only I think 100 pages or so, and when you get to like the final chapters, the writing becomes less and less coherent because of everything that he's going through. And I thought that was just really powerful to read that. And it was also powerful that it's really real, you guys. Like it's not like, it doesn't talk about a bunch of platitudes of like, live every day to the fullest. Like it's really more about his real experience being terminally ill and being sick and going through that, and at the same time dealing with, I don't know, all the emotions that come with dying. And I don't know, there was a lot to think about in this book. It's potentially a book that I would reread at some point because there's just so much to think about in this book. And yeah, I don't know, I ended up giving it 4 stars. And yeah, that's it. Hopefully you liked this video. If you've read any of these books, I would love to know your thoughts, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already, because I post these wrap-up videos every single month. And that's it. Bye guys.